We're going to go ahead and get started with our next panel. It is an absolute honor and a privilege to be in the company of such a star-studded panel today. By all objective measures of success, this panel personifies and paradigmatically exemplifies what success looks like. I think we can safely say that we are starting our plenary panel with a rock star panel. Now, a note to my students in the audience, when you're referencing former judges, current judges, and mayors as rock stars, you should really follow that up with something substantive. So having said that, I wanted to point out that we're not only in the presence of sheer brilliance, but we're in the presence of the substance of light. A brief introduction of these trailblazers will substantiate the claim that they are, in fact, the substance of light. To my left is the Honorable Dennis Archer. He is the current Chairman Emeritus of Dickinson Wright. He is a former mayor of Detroit. He is also a former Justice of the Michigan Supreme Court. Immediately sitting next to him is the Honorable Dalton Roberson. He is a former Wayne County Circuit Court judge and also a former chief judge of the Recorder's Court. To my immediate right is the Honorable Denise Page Hood. She has recently been appointed as the chief judge of the Eastern District of Michigan. She is a former Wayne County Circuit Court judge. One of my greatest strokes of fortune was to have clerked for the Honorable Damon J. Keith. Many celebrate his celebrity, but what gets lost is his absolute legal genius. Judge Keith has made case law within the Sixth Circuit that has substantiated the cause of social justice in ways that are unparalleled in the history of legal jurisprudence. Now, as a legal scholar and teacher here at Wayne, I am graced with having the good fortune of sharing company with some of the most brilliant law school students and also faculty that I could ever hope to keep company with. I would not be here if it were not for so many who preceded me and fought an incredibly proud and resilient fight for social justice as it is race, class, and also gender. Judge Keith, Professor Littlejohn, and the panelists before you today are part of the legacy that makes my life and good fortune possible. And for that, I will be eternally grateful. Stars have a way of making their appeal look seamless and easy. Again, our panelists paradigmatically exemplify professionalism. They are the kind of inspiration all young lawyers seek as a guide, a roadmap, a lodestar to guide them through the quagmires, fears, and frustrations of a legal career. As they meet with us today, they make the struggle appear easy. But for anyone in this room, I'm sure that we all understand that the struggle is hardly easy. We turn to our panelists now and ask them their perspective on the intersection of racism, struggle, and the legal profession. So starting on my left, we will start with the Honorable Judge Roberson and ask him to share his experiences at the intersections of struggle and the legal profession. You're more than welcome to stay.
Well, first, let me thank you for inviting me here, especially since I'm in the company of my good friend Ed Littlejohn, who you're honoring today. Ed and I have a long history together. In fact, he's the godfather of my son. Ed and I first met at the Detroit College of Law when we were both standing out at, I think it was 130 Elizabeth Street, out on the street waiting for our classes to start.
Excuse me, why don't you use the microphone?
Sure.
Stand up and use the microphone.
It's ironic that people would be telling me to stand up and use the microphone, because when I was a judge, nobody even cut the microphone on because I talk so loud. When I graduated from law school, the first job I got was an assistant Wayne County prosecutor. There was a lawyer by the name of Clarence Lassiter, who I'm sure most of you young people don't know about, but he was a star in the legal profession in terms of prosecutorial careers. And he had recommended me to William Cahalan, who turned out, who was the prosecutor, and I got a job there. And as I was telling somebody and it might have been Ed, that he made a lasting impression on me as a lawyer and a prosecutor, because back in that time, plea bargaining was done by one person, and that was the chief of the plea bargaining unit of Wayne County Prosecutor's Office. And I never had any experience in the legal profession, because I hardly knew any lawyers until I started the law school. But Clarence was negotiating a plea one day, and the police was upset with him because of the deal that he was making with the lawyer who happened to be black. And he started protesting it. And not only did Clarence Lassiter, attorney prosecutor Lassiter at that time, disregard what he was saying, but after he finished with it, he called the police officer's commander and told him, don't send him back over there no more with a case. Otherwise, he wouldn't let him in his office. And I was completely in awe at some black man telling a white police officer something like that, because I just couldn't believe it could be done. The next brilliant experience I had with the legal profession was after I became an assistant prosecutor. I tried a case. Many people don't know it, but the Frank Murphy Hall of Justice, I tried the first case in that building as a prosecutor. My defense lawyer was Elliott Hall. The building wasn't even open at the time. We tried a case in the basement, which was the only courtroom that was open. And it was a murder case, and two defendants, and they were brothers, and one of the defendants pled guilty and got a sentence agreement of 12 to 20 years. And the other defendant, who was his younger brother, just to give you a little background of the case, they went into a store to rob it. And the shooter, the man who was being robbed tried to go for a gun, which he had every right to do. And the young man shot him. But the other kid who was with him, his brother, he ran out when the man started going for the gun. So he couldn't believe that he should be convicted of first-degree murder, so they went to trial. And the jury convicted him. And the judge in the case was Judge Elvin Davenport, who was the second black judge on the Recorder's Court. The first black judge on the Recorder's Court was a judge by the name of Charles Jones. Have you discovered him in your writings, Ed? 1950. Yeah, 1950. He only lasted for... he wasn't reelected. Right. He was appointed by Governor William Milliken, I think. Not Milliken, Williams, Governor Williams. And he was defeated in the election. Thinking about the power of newspapers, I know that just before the election, they ran an article. Judges couldn't own interest in liquor license at the time. But was it a bowling? With a liquor license, was it? And when they ran a scathing article on him about him owning this interest in this liquor license. They didn't bother to say that he was trying to sell it at the time and wanted to get rid of it. But anyway, Judge Davenport, after we finished the case and the jury came back with a guilty verdict, he said to me, he says, Roberson, I want you to go upstairs and ask your boss, would he have any objections to me setting this verdict aside and this young man plead to murder second so that he could be sentenced the same as his brother? I don't feel comfortable sending him to prison for the rest of his life. So I went up and spoke to my supervisor, who happened to be a guy by the name of Mike Connor, who ended up being a Court of Appeals judge. And it was a Friday afternoon, and at that time, Ed talks about his picture in the 1300 Beaubien. Our office was on the 5th floor of 1300 Beaubien. The prosecutor's office, if you can believe it, was on the 5th floor. You didn't have offices. You had one desk, one drawer, and a desk. That's all you had. You kept your books in there. And I told Mike what the judge had said. He said, get back to me Monday, or I'll get back to you Monday. And Monday when I got to work, one of the other prosecutors came in and says, Mike Connor wants to see you. So I went in and he says, tell Judge Davenport that we won't object to him setting the verdict aside, and if the defendant pleads guilty to murder second. And it had a lasting impression on me because everybody in the case, both of the lawyers, both of the defendants, and the judge was black. And I was really impressed as a young lawyer, and I've never been a young lawyer, but as a late blooming lawyer, I'll say, because like Ed said, I was never eligible to be a member of the Detroit Bar Association's Young Lawyers section because there was an age of 35 was the maximum age, and I was over 35 when I graduated from law school. When I look at the bench now, and when Ed was talking about the article that he wrote, and I wrote him I wrote the letter to the editor saying that we were the last generation of lawyers who went through segregation, actual and rigid segregation. I graduated from a small segregated high school in southern Alabama. Recently, about 3 years ago, I was playing golf with a Jewish friend of mine. And he was telling me about how when he graduated from law school many, many years ago, he couldn't live in the quad at the Michigan Law School because of his Jewish religion. And he told me about 3 or 4 different times about this. And finally I said to him, I said, you know, I don't have a lot of sympathy for you not being able to live in the law quads at the University of Michigan. And he says, why? I said, because when I graduated from the 7th grade in Southern Alabama, the state provided no further education for me. He says, what are you talking about? I says, in order to get a high school education, I had to ride 30 miles on the back of a pickup truck. My dad, it was cheap. He wouldn't pay for me to ride the Greyhound bus. He paid for me to ride with some men who worked at a paper mill. And I had to get to school. I got to school every morning at 6:45. School didn't start till 8:30, and I had to be with them at 3 o'clock to get my ride back home. I always think about the incident that happened to me in life, which helped mold me, was, I don't know whether any of you remember, when Jackie Robinson first signed with the Major League Baseball team, the Brooklyn Dodgers, he used to barnstorm with the Negro League after the season was over. Baseball seasons didn't go as late as they do now. And he was coming to Mobile, Alabama to play with the Kansas City Royals or somebody. I wanted to go. But I was afraid to ask my father because I thought he would say no. So when the day came and everybody was going, I went. But when I got back out to where I was supposed to catch my ride, it was too late and everybody was gone. And even in that rigid southern town, there were some decent white people. I didn't even know how to hitchhike. I was on the wrong side of the road trying to hitchhike the other way. And somebody saw me out there. 2 white women saw me there and knew that I was Drew's son. And they turned around and came back and got me and took me home that evening. And it was an experience that told me that if I ever achieved in life, I would never forget where I came from. And I brought that philosophy to the bench and to my legal profession. I don't think that many young lawyers, and I know some judges don't have, young judges, even black judges, don't have the experience or the everyday experience because they think that life has always been like it is now. My children don't even have that type of experience. Ed was talking about how the Big Four used to treat you. I was a victim of the Big Four. When I first came to Detroit, I was 16 years of age. And my sister moved on Burlingame and Wildermere. And I didn't know anybody because I graduated from a Southern high school. And you know, 16 is when you make friends. High school is when you make your friends. So I was walking from some people's house, a young lady's house, back to her house, and the Big Four stopped me. I was on the sidewalk and told me to come over to the car. And I said, I walked over and they asked me my name, and I told them my name, and they said, do you have any identification? All I had was a Social Security card. So they said, well, let us see it. So when they handed it to me, when I handed it to them, they told me, so stick your head in the window so we can see you. When I put my head in the window, they rolled up the window and started driving. And they got about half a block. They rolled the window down. I popped out, getting my elbows up and everything. And when I got to my house, my home, where I was living with my sister, my grandmother was there. And I was telling her what happened, and I said, because I came from Alabama, and I figured, well, the police are different here. And I said, Big Mama, we need to go and report this. She said, baby, you can't go report that. You go over there and report that, you might end up in Jackson Prison. That gave me my feeling about the police department. When I got on the bench, one of the first cases I heard on a waiver trial was a young man, 18 years old, who was accused by the police of breaking into a building on Grand River. The police testified that they received a radio run to breaking into a business place. And when they got there, they could see where somebody had broken through the brick and chopped a hole in the window, and they claimed that they saw him coming out. He took the stand and testified that he had left his girlfriend's house and that he was merely walking back home, and he had nothing to do with the break-in. His girlfriend came in and gave him somewhat of an alibi, but not an exact alibi. So when I acquitted the defendant, the prosecutor came over to me and said, Judge, how could you believe that young man over the testimony of a police officer? And I told him about my experience with the Big Four. And I said, that's why I could believe him. I think that we are now in a situation where, as for black judges and specifically black lawyers, that we're in a crisis stage. I talked to a young prosecutor a couple of days ago, preparing to come down here. And I asked her how much money was she making. And I said to her, you don't have to tell me your exact salary because it's none of my business. She says that my take-home pay is now $23,000 a year. And one of the things she said to me was, I said, well, she said, but I don't have enough even to pay my student loans. Ed will vouch for us, and Justice Archer will vouch. There were no student loans when we were in law school. You had a job. You went to your job. I think you taught school, didn't you? Ed, I worked for the welfare, and he worked for the Children's Commission because that was our scholarship. But even with what we had to go through, it steeled us for our relationship to the black community. Justice Archer and I was talking when we got here this morning. I don't believe that lawyers will be able to go out and practice like Justice Archer and I did, and that is graduate from law school, pass the bar exam. I went into the prosecutor's office, he went into private practice, but you get to go out and hang out a shield and get some cards and start hustling business. Because with the present advertisement that's going on, especially minority lawyers, they're not going to be able to compete. My old law partner told me about 5 years ago that I had lunch with him, and he was telling me about his practice. I asked him, I said, how's your practice going? He said, well, I'm doing pretty good. He said, but I had to go to the bank and get a $500,000 loan of credit because I can't get nothing to settle. So I had to get that money to exist on. The average minority lawyer does not have those resources, so he can't compete in this market. If he gets a good case and he tells his client that the case is worth a couple of $1 million, 18 months later he's calling his client, telling him we're going to take $300,000 because everybody knows that he needs the money, the client needs the money, and so he's trying to settle the case, and the insurance company knows he can't hold out. With the abolishment of the recorded court, cut off one of the major sources of black judges in this area. Because when I was at the Recorder's Court, we had 26 black judges out of 29 judges. There are 8 judges on the criminal docket now, which means that that I know of only one judge that has been elected. Now the governors have appointed some to the bench, but there's only one judge that has been elected that I know of since I left the bench, and that's Judge Shannon Walker's. And I refer to her as the Obama election because she, 4 people filed against to run for the seat, but she went over and checked their signatures. They got them all disqualified, so she ran unopposed. And that's why I call it the Obama, because that's what he did for his original Senate seat. But I think that we have got to go back to our community. One of the things that I find distressing is that the black lawyer, to some extent, has moved away from his community, and that's criticism of us. We have got to go back where people know who we are, because they don't. And with the advertising that most lawyers are doing now, unless we become a part of our community, we're not going to be able to compete in this market. And that's why I'm thankful for people like Ed, who is at least getting the information out there. Whether or not we read it or not is a different story. But at least it's out there to know that black lawyers were successful and did make a difference in our community, did make a difference when it was hard to make a difference. Because it's not much easier now with the present Supreme Court that we have, but at least you have the trial level courts where you can feel that you're going to win. When Ed was talking about how difficult it was for black lawyers, one of the older judges when I first became a judge told me a story about when Gideon versus Wainwright first came out and they had to start appointing lawyers for people who were assigned felonies. And the black lawyers would be standing around in the courtroom hoping for assignments. And you might not realize, but they only paid $25 a case. The judge would hand one to one of the black lawyers and say, all you rest of you boys, get out of here. Y'all divide that one up between you. And that was a common practice in the court. Once we got over there, we made sure that every lawyer got a chance to practice their skills and to defend clients. And I think it's important not only for the lawyer to make a living, but to be able to communicate with the people who come through that court. Most of the people who come through that court are minority something. You know, we're getting a lot of Arabic people in, and mostly black people, and to be able to communicate with them, it's important that you have somebody to share their background. There was a study many years ago when I was active with the court, from the National Center of State Courts, that says judges who look like the people who are before them tend to treat them better. And that's an important factor, because when you look out and say, that could be my brother, it could be my nephew, you at least recognize them as being that. And I think that's why it's important that we as lawyers and we as judges recognize that it's important for black lawyers to be a part and black judges to be a part of our society. Thank you.
Let me first make the observation that when we were in law school at night at the Detroit College of Law, and we were all working at our various day jobs, there was one among us who stood out, who had an impeccable, brilliant mind, who was someone that we all admired and respected because of his overall experience that he had been through before he became a law student. Ed Littlejohn is a very remarkable person who is widely respected across the United States. He was first in our class, and he was first in our class because he earned it. Nobody gave us anything. When we all walked into law school at Detroit College of Law, we were all told the same thing at our sort of welcome to law school. Look to your left, look to the right, and who's not going to be here when you get ready to graduate. He was an inquisitive person, a person who wanted to know more, a person who felt there was more beyond the law books. And that's the Ed Littlejohn that I've always known and admired. And for me, he's been a personal role model. So I find it somewhat interesting today, and putting things in perspective before I share my remarks, that Ed Littlejohn and I met in law school, going to law school at night, and I was able to find a summer job in 1967 with Damon Keith's law firm. And that summer was remarkable in many respects. First, my wife and I got married on June 17th, 1967. A couple of Sundays later, about a month or so later, my father-in-law and I were coming back from playing golf and saw smoke in the air. And as I dropped him off in the Boston Edison area on Longfellow, by the time I got home, I discovered that there was a riot that was taking place. And for those of us who existed at that time, all the judges called upon lawyers, no matter what your discipline or area of interest happens to be, because there were so many people incarcerated, fenced in on Belial, and people needed to know what they were charged with and the like. So as a law student, I had an opportunity to see what this outstanding African-American law firm was able to do on behalf of those who did not have a voice, did not know what to do, needed help. And all of the lawyers in the firm, and all of the lawyers, frankly, by and large, throughout Detroit, participated and responded to that calling. So I started very impressed with what a lawyer could do. But I also observed, as was pointed out by Judge Roberson, and if you really want to know the history of what is going on in this city and in America, you just got a little capsule today from Ed Littlejohn. I indicated to him that when he was concerned about the time, I almost spoke up for the three of us and said, he can have our time because I want to continue to be enriched, because it reminded me so much of what we all went through. And it's interesting that today, so many students who graduate from law school that look like me don't have a clue in terms of the history and the things that people went through. You read his work, and you'll find that many of the outstanding lawyers of color. Started working in the post office, started working in the automobile factories, to go to law school and stayed there until they could build their practice up, because we were not invited in or given an opportunity to join large law firms or law firms. The only integrated law firm in this city that everybody knew about and was proud of was Ernie Goodman, George Crockett, Bob Millinder, Harry Philo, etc. Chuck Ravitz and Ken Cockrell came out of that. It brought back a lot of memories, Ed. Thank you for that. And thank you for reminding us. I graduated from Western Michigan University in Kalamazoo, and I began teaching at the Detroit Public Schools. I taught learning disabled students. I went to law school at night, and I met a professor who started the same time that I started law school. His name was Don Campbell. Turns out that Don Campbell was a great mentor to me. Don Campbell happened to be white. And Ed, I don't remember having any black professor at Detroit College of Law. No, I'm talking about when we were there. So my point is that Don Campbell took time, and while I was in law school, he was the one who suggested that I might want to clerk at Ford Motor Company or be a summer associate or whatever you clerk, whatever you want to be called at that time, because Ford Motor Company had called Detroit College of Law to let them know that they were open and wanted to make a difference and would be happy to have someone of color to come and clerk or be there. He was also the one that when I left law school, getting ready to graduate, suggested that he knew, because of all of our commitments and what we learned of our past, that we were likely and clearly going to be members of the Wolverine Bar Association. The Wolverine Bar Association was the only black bar in the entire state, representing everybody. Today, of course, we've got black bar associations in all of our major cities in Michigan. And so I went and took his advice and got involved with the young lawyers section, because when I came out, Dalton, I was still young enough that I could join the Detroit Bar Association Young Lawyers section. And when I graduated and passed the bar, I found out that I passed the bar from Don Hobson. Don Hobson was an outstanding lawyer, former teacher. He went on to become a judge at Detroit Recorder's Court. He knew every lawyer in the state of Michigan and knew every person of color who was going to take the bar exam, and was able to let us know if we passed or not. Of course, I didn't believe it until I saw my name in the newspaper. But when I was getting ready to graduate, having worked in Judge Keith's law firm the summer that the fall that he got appointed to was nominated by Senator Phil Hart to serve on the Eastern District of Michigan, the federal court, and having had the opportunity to be at Ford Motor Company, I sent a resume to a large law firm. I went to the law firm. They, for the interview, put on my best clothes, and I went to Martindale Hubbard before I left, and I wanted to find out who was going to be interviewing me. So I went in and thanked me for coming in and suggested to me that you got a nice resume and stuff like that, but we don't hire anyone from the Detroit College of Law. We go to the University of Michigan, we go to Harvard, we go to Yale, etc. And I've told so many law students as I've traveled around the country, I'm so delighted that Richard Pryor was not at that time someone who was a star, and everybody knew, because I really like Richard Pryor. I got all his albums. I thanked the person and left. And as I thanked the person was leaving, I was thinking to myself, how can you tell me that you do not hire any law students from the Detroit College of Law when you yourself graduated from the Detroit College of Law? He was a partner in the firm. And then it, of course, dawned on me that there was not one lawyer of color as an associate or as a partner in any of the large major law firms in Detroit, or for that matter, in the state. I say that to reinforce what Ed Littlejohn has shared with you today, that things are not what they seem to be. I will also tell you that while we were all proud to be the largest class at the time of any law school in Michigan or in the region, being 10, with all that we've all gone through, I confess I was shocked today to learn that there are only 5 African American students at Wayne State in 2016. You've heard the phrase, the more things change, the more they remain the same. When I couldn't find a job or didn't get hired, I was fortunate enough to be hired at Gregg and Gardner. J. Robert Gregg, who went on to be a probate judge, Sam Gardner, who went on to be a judge at Detroit Recorder's Court, and much like Judge Roberson, was a chief judge of Detroit Recorder's Court. 6 months later, Elliott Hall, Horace Stone, Alex Allen, and myself started our own law firm. We thought we could go and get about $20,000 apiece. After all, we're young lawyers, we got starting our own law firm. We got a little something to go for us, and we figured we would go borrow $20,000 apiece, buy our office furniture, and by that time, because Judge Keith had opened up the door to the Guardian Building, we could open up our office in the Guardian Building, and we were never so happy when all 4 of us and our wives signed on across each other, where we signed off everything for $5,000 apiece at the First Independence National Bank of Detroit, and we opened up our law firm. Paid off the loan, and we all have done miraculous kinds of things. I was appointed to the Supreme Court by Governor James Blanchard 20 years after Otis Smith, who was the first to be on the Michigan Supreme Court, who's African American. And when I resigned and let Judge or Governor Blanchard know that I would appreciate it deeply that if he could find his way clear, it would help me in taking my next steps if he could find his way clear to appoint someone else of color. He did. He appointed Conrad Mallett. After Conrad Mallett, Bob Young is on the court, who's number 4. I joined Dickinson Wright, became an equity partner, ultimately became chairman of the firm after I'd served 8 years as mayor of the city of Detroit. And while I was, here's what, let me just sort of break it down as best I can. I went back to Ed Littlejohn as I was active in the American Bar Association. I started my first meeting in January of, or in the annual meeting of 1972 in San Francisco. I just left the National Bar Association meeting in Miami, Florida, and there's about 1,500 of us from all over the United States go to a meeting in San Francisco, and just the young lawyers are about 1,500, and there's only 3 of us of color who were lawyers. And I had a decision to make at that point, and that was, one, do I stay active in the National Bar Association and walk away from the American bar because of what the history has been with the American bar, or do I stay? I decided to do both, be active in the National Bar and stay and try to open up doors in the American Bar Association. There was about 3% of the population or licensed lawyers that were lawyers of color back around 1970. Today we're about 10.4%. The American Bar created a task force to take a look at why was it that there were hardly any associates or partners in the 250 largest law firms in America. Why was it that you did not see tenured track professors or professors on a tenure or given tenure at America's law schools unless they were teaching at historically black universities? Why was it that the only time you saw a judicial law clerk clerking for a federal judge or a Supreme Court justice in our states, why was it that you didn't see that unless they were working for or clerking for judges of color? And why was it that corporate America didn't seem to find their way clear to hire law firms or seek out partners in large law firms to make them the billing partner, or utilizing the services of minority-owned law firms to represent them? So again, I consulted with my mentor and friend and chief historian, and we decided that the best way for me to proceed was, and what we did was to start a minority, a pilot program that called for 6 large corporations, 6 large law firms, and 21 minority-owned law firms. At that time, I was on the Michigan Supreme Court. One of the 6 large law firms was Dickinson Wright. David Lewis's law firm, William Hasey's law firm, etc., were among the 21 minority-owned law firms. We were able to get it started thanks to an idea that came from Steve Middlebrook, who was a vice president, corporate secretary, and general counsel of Aetna Life and Casualty. But we couldn't attract the 6 that we needed. Roy Ritchie, Chrysler Corporation, jumped right on it. When I got to Harry Pierce, who was then Vice President General Counsel of General Motors, and shared with him what our issues were, Harry Pierce said, "I'm in." He immediately went and got the other 6 other corporations that we needed. And the end of one other thing about Harry wrote a letter to the, at the time, 850 law firms in the United States. And he said, because we value the business and the people who buy our cars, we want to make sure that we have lawyers that look like the people who buy our cars. And so he sent that to all these law firms. And the following year, he sent a second letter and said, in case you didn't get the first one, here it is again. Now I want to know who in your firm is representing us, and I want to know how many billable hours they're charging. And all of a sudden, all the firms across America, when asked, well, how many lawyers of color do you have? Well, you know, we're looking, we just can't seem to find anybody. I mean, we go here, well, where do you go? Well, we go to Harvard. I said, well, how many? Well, in any event, they started finding people. Today, thanks to an African American by the name of Rod Palomore, who was with Sarah Lee, then went to General Foods, I think it was, before he retired. He came out with a call for action. He said, and got 156 general counsels of the Fortune 500 to sign off, we're only going to use firms that believe in diversity and inclusion like we do. We respect women. We respect lawyers of color. We expect that when we come to your firm that we want to be able to utilize women and lawyers of color in your law firm. That's what we want to be able to do. Then they had the minority. It was started by Stacy Mobley, who's a general counsel of DuPont, and Tom Sager, his number two, who took over from Stacy. They made it very clear by establishing the Minority Corporate Counsel Association that has over some 200 general counsels, that this is what they expect. And then Corporate Counsel Association, now it's a different name, they did the same thing. They wanted to make a difference for women and for lawyers of color. But here is where I have my problem. We were doing so well. Lawyers were being hired. Lawyers were being hired by law firms. But it wasn't easy because you have some people in the law firms who resented the fact that there were women and lawyers of color being hired, and resented the fact that general counsels were making these demands. Because you see, along the way, one lawyer who was a general counsel of Walmart at the time took away $60 million in legal business from law firms who decided that they weren't going to hire lawyers of color and women. In any event, when we had the recession in 2008, and the National Law Journal last summer took a look at what occurred, was the lawyers who were let go from their law firms, and the largest percentage were African Americans. And African American women were hit the hardest. So you make all these gains, and then you find we still have challenges and issues. We make all the gains of what has taken place here at Wayne State and other colleges and universities. And yet, we see today, the more things change, the more they remain the same. But I am very optimistic about the future, and let me just tell you why, and I'll sit down. How many of you know of the $1 Billion Roundtable? Could you raise your hand? High. Raise your hand high. So we see 1, 2. The $1 Billion Roundtable are now 22. I served on the board of Johnson Controls, which was one of those. The $1 Billion Roundtable are those corporations who do at least $1 billion a year with women and minority-owned suppliers. You see, back in 1982-83, the social scientists and the demographers started writing about what was called then the browning of America. They predicted that by 2056, now this is back in 82-83, by 2056, two things were going to happen. The largest single ethnic minority group would be Hispanics, and that the majority of the people living in the United States by 2056 would be people of color. I credit Reverend Dr. Leon Sullivan, who was on the board of General Motors at that time, asking General Motors to put their people to work to find out whether or not, and it was based upon the relaxation of immigration rules and birth rate. They asked the board asked their GM people to find out whether or not it had any merit. They checked it out and said, yes, it does have merit. In 2003, the Census Department said that the Hispanic population was now the largest single ethnic minority group at 13.2%. African Americans was 12.6, 12.7. In 2004, or 2004, the Census Department said by 2050, there would be a population surge where Asian Americans and Hispanic Americans would triple in size, by 2050. And 2008, the Census Department said that because of birth rate and immigration, the majority of the people living in the United States would occur, who would be of majority of color, will occur sometime between as early as 2035 or as late as 2042. In 2011, the Census Department said that between 2015 and 2019, the majority of the people living in the United States 18 years of age and younger would be people of color. Today, the majority of the babies born every day in the United States are babies of color. Businesses, corporate America understands market share. When people of color have discretionary dollars to spend, where they go to vacation, what kind of cars they drive, what clothes you put on, etc., corporate America understands the value of market share and branding. I will tell you, the law firms who will survive this and will go and succeed and will be, I think, always ahead of the curve are those law firms that respect and value women and lawyers of color. Those who fail to do that will lose. That's my optimism. In the meantime, we still have got work to do. All I have to do is remind you is to take a look or think back, if you did watch them, the debates that were early on. And then you think about the Senate Majority Leader who has said to the President of the United States, do not bring any nominee or appointee before us for the United States Supreme Court. We're going to let the people decide the next president, and the people who decide that, whoever the next president, they will be the ones who will appoint. According to the United States Constitution, the president is obligated, it's not may, it shall appoint. And the Senate has a responsibility to, at that point, give a fair and timely hearing and a vote. The people, Mr. Senate Majority Leader, has spoken. They spoke in 2008 and again in 2012, and it doesn't, he's got 340 days, or had at the time 340 days left in office. And the longest it's taken before that to confirm someone was 120 days, 125 days. That's the kind of thing that we're dealing with that causes us to be and should be concerned about the education of our kids. We need to fill a pipeline, so we got a pipeline of kids coming in to law school, and it makes a difference. In some, for those of you in law school, you're coming into a prime time. None of us were promised, Ed, I, Judge Keith, none of us were promised, if you go to law school, you're going to get good grades. You go to law school, you're going to pass the bar. You go to law school, you're going to get good grades, pass the bar, and you're going to make all kind of money, et cetera, et cetera. They just said, here's an opportunity. It's all up to you. It's what you do with that legal degree that makes a difference. It's all of us working together for a better America that will make us stronger.
The Honorable Denise Page Hood.
Telling me to take all the time I need, but I have a timer over there. First, I want to thank Rachel and Sean for inviting me to be a part of this program at the law school, and I'm very honored to be a part of the program that's honoring Professor Littlejohn. You should know that I'm not an original Detroiter, but I hope you won't tell too many people. I came to Detroit for a man, I guess, is the best way of putting it. But when I came here, some things happened to me, which I'll tell you about in a minute, but I want you to know that you've been a person that I always have admired, and there's a reason for that. I think that probably the intersection for race and law, and I'm on this wonderful program with two of the guys that I really admire as well, and I'll tell you about that in a minute too. I think the intersection of race and law for me began in my home with my parents. You heard earlier Peter talk about Judge Keith's parents having an impact on him, and I grew up in the North. At least people in Columbus, Ohio do think it's the North, even though there's a lot of Southernisms there. And I think my parents were concerned that, you know, we were in the midst of the civil rights movement, and I was too young to go sit in at the Woolworths, which let black people sit there anyway, in Columbus. And they wanted to make sure that I understood the subtleties of racism. And so when we went to look for a house, we went to a house and the people said, oh, the house is sold. And so me and my sister were like, yeah, we can go home, we can put on our play clothes, we're done with this house. And the next week, my father rode back to that house, which still had a for sale sign, and he said, you should know the house is not sold, it's just that they don't want to sell it to us. And I mean, we were like, you know, my parents were working class people. We had on our Sunday best when we went to the house, and he said, you will find that racism will raise its ugly head in times when you don't expect it. And so I credit them with giving me the knowledge of my own history. And that's part of what Ed Littlejohn has given to us. He has an article about black lawyers in Michigan up to the 1970s. And if you want to know about some of the people that they've been talking about, they're all there, and he tells you a little bit about each one of them. You should know this is a short history. We're talking a woman that many of us know, Geraldine Bledsoe Ford, being elected to public office in my lifetime. I mean, in the time since I was a teenager and knew what an election was. We're talking about people serving on the courts in my lifetime. In my lifetime, I did not expect there'd be a black president, but there is one. And so you know that there can be tremendous change. And so I think there has been tremendous change. It has not been as much change as those of us who grew up in those times wanted. My personal history led me to Detroit. First I didn't want to be a lawyer. There was a recession. I went to law school so that I wouldn't have to go back to Columbus, Ohio, where my parents knew all the black people in town, and I never could do anything. And I intended to stay out east, where I was very fortunate. Now, they've told you that there was no affirmative action. But there was affirmative action, even though I probably get counted as one of those, even though I was a top student in my class and had every right to sit in the chairs that I sat at the two schools I went to as anybody else. And that came from my personal heritage of people telling you that you're important, you can make a difference, it's not going to be easy, and you're going to have to do a lot of hard work. But I came to Detroit. When I was coming to Detroit, my friends from undergrad thought I was giving up my life by becoming a lawyer, and not only that, I was going back to Detroit, and what was I thinking? But my college roommate's family was from here, and she said, when you get there, be sure that you meet Beth Duncombe. She's a young lawyer, but she's making a lot of business for herself. And I said, okay. And that's Dennis's sister-in-law. When I came, she invited me to come to the Wolverine Bar Association. And so I came to the Wolverine Bar Association, which was pretty well established then, and I met people that I would not have met from my job in the city. And it reminded me that I stand on the shoulders of lots of other people because there were judges who came to that Bar Association's meeting. And so I got to meet a lot of the people who were movers and shakers in our community. And I'm grateful to her for that because it would have been the last thing I thought to do. Most of my friends were at the church I attended where my husband was a minister, and I didn't know any lawyers from my youth, and I certainly didn't know any lawyers in Michigan. But I learned a lot from that. I learned that I could meet people outside of my scope, that I could get involved in doing something for other people in the legal profession, and that those people could also help me. And one of them, Joe Marshall, who was a partner of the firm that Dennis, Mayor Archer ended up at, invited me to come to that young lawyers group called the Detroit Barristers. And I was actually young enough to go there. Unlike the gentleman that you've heard so far, I didn't go to law school at night. I was fortunate to be able to go to law school during the day. I still had to work in law school and during the summer and the like. But because I hadn't wanted to be a lawyer, I hadn't probably done the kinds of things that people do to get to that position, to know what kind of law I want to practice, where I want to be. And I think that even if you're in law school and you don't intend to practice law, you're going to go out and be a novelist, or you're going to be a journalist, or you're just doing it to get in business, that it's important to have an idea about what you might do if you get there. And I ended up at the city's law department, and it was not a place where you would meet a lot of different kinds of lawyers outside of our own governmental practice. And so Joe invited me to join this group, and when I joined that group, I met lawyers in different kinds of firms, lawyers from different walks of life than people in the Wolverine Bar Association, and I was allowed to make some professional relationships with them. And that was good because I was really kind of interested in politics. When I was around middle school, my dad had said I got a call from one of my kindergarten classmates. Her father, a black lawyer, was running for city attorney in Columbus, Ohio, and they needed people to stuff envelopes and take out literature. And I thought, oh, that would be really fun to do. And I never thought that that would be something I would really need later on in life. But he was someone we all knew. He lived in our community. He was really Janice's dad to us. He wasn't really the big-time lawyer that he turned out to be. But he talked to us a lot about fairness and what happened in the community and what kinds of lives we wanted to live. And when we were 5, we wanted to be teachers and nurses and that kind of thing. And he really gave us the idea that we could do something different. And so, because of court reorganization, I was involved in interviewing some candidates for some legal positions, and a person came through with little or no experience that is a very good judge today. But my colleagues didn't think that she was really qualified and said, next year you should run, Denise. And back then, you just didn't run for office. You had to go talk to 100 people before you did that, and to kind of get the okay, because in our community there were leaders who were kind of directing people. They were helping you to develop whether or not that was something that you should do. And so I would encourage the people who are seeking to be lawyers today to make those connections, to really talk to people who are more experienced about what you need to do. I was very lucky. My father-in-law was a politician, and he said, I'll do everything I can to help you, and I'll teach you how to run for office, which was kind of a new experience for me, talking to complete strangers about how wonderful I was. And I really wasn't very good at that. I was really, back then, Mayor Archer, that's true, I was pretty shy. except when it came to getting rides home from bar events. But I was really kind of shy, and I wasn't really used to going out and meeting complete strangers and telling them how wonderful I was, or having people tell me that they didn't like me for some reason that had nothing to do with me or race or gender. Usually people didn't like me for one of those three things, but now people seem to have other reasons not to like me. But I got a lot of encouragement from the lawyers and the judges that I had come into contact with. And so I appreciated that. And I was lucky enough to have a seat on the 36th District Court, even though none of the unions except the firefighters endorsed me. And you all may not think that's a big thing, but back then, if you didn't get the endorsement of the UAW and some of the other unions, you could probably know you were going to end up at the end of the ballot. But I got a lot of encouragement. Professor Littlejohn gave me some encouragement back then. It was really helpful for people to come whose shoulders I really stand on to help me run for office. And you know, when I was there, I had a lot of big ideas about what I would do, and some of them really came true. But one of the things I think that was really important was that our judicial system really works on people having confidence in it, or lacking confidence in it, and it surprising them by how it might be able to work, because we know sometimes it really doesn't work. But I think sometimes when I was sitting up there, someone would come in and they would say, I can't believe a black woman is a judge. And that would lessen their anxiety about being in court for whatever they were there for. And while that may not always be the case, you may still come to a harsh outcome, it at least gives people a different kind of confidence in court. And one of the other things that happens is if you have more black people on juries, while they may not come to a different decision at the end of the day, they will have, the person that's charged with the crime has a lot more confidence. I really wanted to go to the Wayne County Circuit Court. And I was kind of itching to do that, and I stayed active in my bar associations and was really working to get to know the people that I might get appointed. And I got a call one day from Governor Blanchard's office saying, we'd like you to go to the Recorder's Court. And I said, I didn't sign up for that. And he said, yeah, but we need a couple people over there, and we've looked at your resume. We think it might work out for you. Now, mind you, all I'd ever done was preliminary examinations on the criminal side, which meant all I had to do was see was there probable cause, had they made the elements, that was it. I didn't really have any big experience in that area. But I didn't know the governor well enough to say, no, I don't want to do that. I just knew the person calling me well enough to say, I'll go there, but you know, I really want to go to circuit court. When I got there, I knew nearly nothing. And a lot of what I learned from watching and listening to my chief judge at the time, who was Judge Dalton Roberson. And I don't care what anybody says. I hope that I'm the chief judge now, and it's not by election or appointment, it's by statute. I hope that my judges will feel about me the way the judges felt about him. He had an award-winning court. He would show up on your sidebar at any time of day during the day just to see how you were doing. Sometimes he showed up to say, I see you have a lot of little bench trials, and instead I'm going to send you a juvenile charge with a life offense. You know, I'm going to take your whole docket this day. If you get a plea or if the case runs short, you can just like go home. You don't remember that, do you? Yeah, okay. And, but it taught me a lot of things. First, it taught me that people need to have confidence in your work. And I think he had confidence in my work. And people also need to keep an eye on you. And while you might think it's kind of paternalistic for your chief judge to come around and keep an eye on you, part of that is modeling what leadership is. And I think that as black lawyers, we really need that. We really need the modeling of leadership so that we can achieve what we need to do, and we have role models to do that. And we don't need to get too far away from that. I mean, my parents always said, you're not getting anywhere just on your own. Somebody is going to help you. And you may not know who that somebody is, but they are going to help you. And because you may not know them, you need to help somebody else in a position similar to yours to get ahead. And of course, we had the leadership of two other people here. I can remember one time I was trying to find out something about the history of a couple of black lawyers in Michigan, and one of my colleagues came up and said, you know, Ed Littlejohn and Don Hobson know every black lawyer that ever existed. And I said, really? And they said yes, and then I found some articles by Professor Littlejohn, and I happened to be with Don Hobson, and he had the most amazing set of materials about black lawyers that I hadn't heard of before. And even though I thought that I knew a lot about black history, there was a whole history that I hadn't touched. And so I knew there were people in our community that were keeping up that part of our history, and that we really needed to rely on those people. And we really need to make sure there are some people like that following us today. And of course, Mayor Archer, there's nothing to be said. He's kind of like Judge Keith, everybody's mentor. Everybody kind of claims a part of you leading them somewhere. And maybe not directly touching them, but touching them in a way that lets you know that they have a sense of humor and they have a sense of thinking about themselves. So for instance, I'm going to be a judge, well, for life, or at least the period of my good behavior. But, you know, Mayor Archer has had a lot of jobs. You know, one of them was justice. He's had a lot of other positions. And that's a modeling technique for lawyers to look at, that you need to have. I'm sure none of them were his backup plan, but you need to have some ideas about where you really are going and where you are making the most influence in your life, because you do have the opportunity to do that. You're going to be put in some positions where if you take an opportunity, you can run with it and do something different. And you need to not be afraid of doing something different, something outside of your box, something that maybe you have to give up something else for to get that done. And I think that's a really good role model, especially for young people today who are going to have more than one or two jobs, and they're maybe going to have to start off doing something that wasn't what you planned. So I really respect him for that, and he's been a role model to me, even though I like keeping the job that I have. But I think it's a really good thing, and that he's made a lot of inroads for us. And so I think it's kind of good we went in this order, because we've heard that, you know, as much as things change, they will in fact stay the same. But really, we've made a lot of progress. We've made a lot of progress, but there is the opportunity to go back. And the reason that you can't go back is that whoever sits in seats like we sit in and sits in positions that you lawyers will sit in need to make sure that there's no going back. And I'll give you an example of that. You know, racism, as my parents said, will occur in the places you least imagine it will happen. But one happened to me somewhere I expected. Sometimes I expected, and so I know that I've sat in a judge's meeting where I've made a suggestion, and people just blew me off. I mean, you know, I have predominantly white colleagues, and I'm like, that's a really good suggestion. Why are they blowing me off? And then my colleague across the table from me winks at me and makes the exact same suggestion. Okay? And then the chief judge at the time turned to him and said, oh, that's a great suggestion. And I am like, I think I said those exact words like 5 minutes ago. But the issue is, do I say then, I said those words 5 minutes ago and you should give me some respect, or am I happy enough that whatever the issue is going forward? And you're going to have to make those choices. Sometimes you need to say that. One other time, I got a list of people we were going to send out for a committee. No minorities or women on it. And I was like, what does that say about our court that we have nobody on here? And so the response to me was, you didn't recommend anybody. I said, you're right, but by 12 noon, I will have like a bunch of people from you to pick from. Okay, and that is knowing who those contacts are that you should bring into the fold and making sure they're brought in. But also that's a time to tell people, if I'm not here, does that mean you think I don't exist? because sometimes you just have to say, I have a seat at the table, it's my seat, and you need to make sure that these seats are filled by a variety of people, and they need to be filled that way, even if I don't recommend anybody. And so I think we always need to be vigilant about what is happening. Like when I hear there are only 5 law students, I think, what did I do wrong? You know, when there's hunger, I tell my son all the time, I'm sorry that in my lifetime, I didn't solve hunger for you. And so I think we have to be really diligent about bringing people along with us. It's not just enough for us to be in our spaces and not have people come along. So for instance, Mayor Archer mentioned the law clerks. So I am always asking, we have this great, wonderful intern program, and does anybody hire them? Do we hire anybody from that core of people that we know exist? And to be always vigilant. How was your intern? Were they somebody that you would hire or recommend to somebody to hire? And to make sure that, you know, people just don't get to say, there's nobody like that, because they still will. When they have a panel for a bar association or a training, you have to make sure that that panel is diverse. And even though I don't think that should always be my job at the time, I think I owe it to Mayor Archer and Judge Roberson and Professor Littlejohn for that to be my job. And it's your job, too, to say that I'm not going to stand for us to go back even 1 second. And when I see us going back, then I'm going to do something to go forward. Because, you know, there are more black federal judges than ever before. And, you know, in the demise of the Recorder's Court, there are lefts, but, you know, I know that at my church, right over here on Warren and St. Antoine, that about 1/3 of the people drive 45 minutes from somewhere to come to church on Sunday. And they must drive somewhere close to them to vote, right? And so they ought to be able to elect somebody in their county to sit on the bench. Okay, so those state court judges, raise your hand, because, you know, I always like to recognize you. Don't be shy. You know, Judge Keith, raise your hand, and Judge Murphy, these are people that, you know, we need to support and make sure that we don't fall back in that area, because it's easy to fall back to where we've been. And so I would encourage you to look at and remember the history of people whose shoulders that you're going to stand upon. I certainly do, and give them credit every day for me being where I am, because I could not have got them there without them. When they had the Citizen Merit Selection Committee for my seat, a guy came up to me after I was a judge, and he said, I'm so happy you're there, you know. On the committee, you know, I was really happy to see your name come through, and I'm looking at him, and I'm like, I don't know this man from Adam, okay? I mean, he's just somebody that was on the committee from another area of the state, and he knew something about me that helped me. And so you don't know where your help is always going to come from, but you need to make sure that you're giving that part of it back, because we have made strides. Women have made strides, minorities have made strides, but there's so far to go that, especially in my generation, we see that it just looks very far off. But it really maybe is not. It's in your lifetime. You have to think about where we came from when we can remember that the first black that was a lawyer in Michigan, or the first black woman elected, that wasn't that long ago, and you have the opportunity to make your own road like that. I know that one of the things I'm really proud of is the fact that I'm the 4th African American to be the chief judge of my court, okay? And that's like in my lifetime. It started with Judge Keith and Judge Cook and then Judge Taylor. And that's not a very long span of time, but it's something we need to pay attention to. And so I would thank these leaders of our community and these giants on whose shoulders I stand. Encourage all of you to really just take the opportunities that come your way and make them an opportunity for someone else. Thank you.
We've gone a bit over time, and I'm actually going to close this very quickly. There are ways in which Detroit gets used as a proxy for racism. There are ways in which Detroit, the city, is saturated with a lot of criticism and vitriol and vile that is unwarranted. And what gets lost in that criticism is the triumph, resilience, struggle, and compelling narratives that we've heard today. It's the spirit of resilience that is very much a part of the legacy of Professor Littlejohn and the panelists that you've seen today. I want to thank Justice Archer, Judge Roberson, and Judge Hood for sharing their truly compelling narratives. For me, and I think for you, this has just been an inspiring moment, and the kind of guidance that will get us through the rest of the week, the rest of the year, and perhaps our careers. So thank you very much to our panelists. And thank you to you as well. At this point, we are going to have lunch at the McGregor Center. There are students here that will actually help us all get over there. Again, I wanted to thank you, and at this point, we can enjoy lunch.